As you matriculate through this long path of jiu-jitsu, what do you think the biggest change in jiu-jitsu is right now? You know, me head to intellectual transition? Is it just the expansion of the sport in general? Is it the mentality?
In my time, there's a couple of things I would say. First of all, it's the mentality being a lot different right now. The whole kind of selling point is like, oh, like how to deal with a street fight. And then you kind of learn it's like, well, like the way you deal with a street fight is not being in that fight in the first place. It's like, you know,
Amen.
It doesn't really matter what techniques you have or this kind of isolated one-on-one situation. It's like, world doesn't work that way. It's not fair and it's not right sometimes. And it's just literally a matter of survival. So you kind of have to get that out of your head at some point right there. The idea is like, well, if somebody attacked me on a one-on-one situation with no weapons involved, I'd probably handle myself really well. I don't ever want to be in that situation. I don't trust in the fact that it's always going to be that situation.
Right.
But when you remove that kind of self-defense aspect on it, that kind of opens it up to being able to do a lot of things. Like if you're not worried about getting punched in the face, you know, you're going to see a lot of things like inversions and like people butt scooting and stuff like that. Again, the old guys kind of cry. To be clear, I don't want to be one of those guys like when I was coming up, there was a guy that's been here like relatively like years past and was like, oh, back in my day. It's like, you don't want to be that guy. It's like, no, get off my lawn. It's like, like Snoopy Kid and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, I didn't want to hear that then, and I don't want to be that guy now. Today
is a big day, folks. Yes, indeed. We have a fantastic guest here today. Love the shirt. Come on, bro. Come on, bro. But I'm also going to try one of my Shannon Sharp style intros for the first time. Let's see what happens. Today, we have our guest, Gumby. Alan Marques. Gumby began training in the early 90s. Was one of the first guys reporting on jiu-jitsu and MMA. He also has several tournament wins. He became a black belt in the year 2006, owned school 2009. He has birthed many other black belts to his name. He's been a part of a couple different companies on the mat, OTM, also part of Illness, one of my favorite gi companies ever. Even though that before, I didn't even knew this dude. He's a businessman. He's a representative of San Jose. He is Gumby. What's up, buddy?
That's quite the intro right there. You did the research. Got my head a little bit big in there right there. It's like, I've like the Club Shay Shay type vibe on that one right there.
I was trying it out, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I might be the Cat Williams on your podcast right there. So.
Let's go. I love it, man. So Gumby, you've been around it. First of all, I've talked in little snippets on the show about my participation in jiu-jitsu. The reason why I do that, as you probably know, or you can speak to the people yourself, I find it to be something that's enriched my life a lot, both through the endeavors I made with it, the people I've made in it, just the mentality of it all. You've been in the sport for almost, like I said, you got your black belt in 06. You know, you've been in the sport since the early days of MMA and also early days of jiu-jitsu in this country. You are a San Jose guy, correct?
Now I'm definitely a San Jose guy now. I'm a Bay Area guy.
He's a Bay Area guy.
I grew up in Daly City, San Francisco.
There you go.
Moved down to the South Bay, 90s. So
that's a long time.
Yeah,
so that fusion of of community on community. You know, you're in the Bay. You're also in the community. You've been in the community almost 30 years now. I mean, that's a significant amount of time in both a black belt capacity almost, 20 years in black belt capacity, but also around the judo in the area, which we have fantastic judo in this area, just nationwide. This is where it started at. What was some of your journey look like over these last 30 years?
I started off with the same reasons as anybody else. I actually did a little bit of judo when I was a kid. So the whole idea of grappling wasn't foreign to me. Like, oh, this would be effective in a fight. I always tell the story that my roommate that was super into Japanese pro wrestling at the time actually ordered the first UFC pay-per-view live. Nice. So I've been a fan, or I started watching UFC 1, which was totally what I didn't expect. The shock value of when the sumo wrestler charged across and the French dude kicked the guy's teeth in the first 10 seconds. It's like, okay, that wasn't exactly entertaining, but it was just raw.
Yeah.
That was 94 and 96. Half Gracie opened up his gym. And at that point I was just out of college, wanted something active to do. Because I was in the working community at that point. Right. I was like, I don't want to define myself by sitting in front of a desk all day. So this is just a great opportunity to go ahead and try that out. And yeah, as it was, it's like kind of fell into the deep end of that. Use that to kind of, supplement what I guess to find kind of something to belong in, since that's kind of the theme on this. Like I was aware of what jiu-jitsu is or what the martial arts community was. I knew I didn't want to define myself by that desk job. I need, literally, like, what's the exact opposite of sitting in front of a screen for 10 hours a day? Like going to the gym in some form, definitely doing jiu-jitsu and being active in that sense. But there was that aspect of, discovering the whole community that was in there, all the things that do to enrich your life, and gradually going down the rabbit hole of going a couple of times a week to all the time, being part of the team, to forming on the mat, to, I got laid off from my last tech job. I was like, I don't have to go back. I'll see how it's going. And then going down that rabbit hole of entrepreneurship and working in this industry when it was just coming up, to a black belt, to having it on school, to... So if you had asked me when I moved to this area, essentially for college, like, did I see myself as Mr. San Jose with multiple studios and being a black belt and having a conversation on a podcast with anybody? It's like, no, like it's just such a testament to how your life can take multiple twists and turns, and you just kind of go with the flow and take advantage of what comes to you and be blessed for the opportunities. It's not like by luck, but it's a combination of luck, circumstance, and taking advantage of that.
I think that, like we mentioned before, I think the hard work inside the work is the best place to start. And it sounds like that's what you kind of fell in love with. You fell in love with the community, being there. You have to be in the gym to get a black belt. There's no other way. You got to be on the mats. They don't give them joints away. They're not in Cracker Jack boxes. I've looked everywhere. The work's on the mat. And, I know personally, like, I started doing jiu-jitsu in 2004, and I've taken several breaks. I've traveled a lot. I've moved a lot around. But I remember my early days looked a lot different than the gyms I walk in today. I walk in a lot of gyms today. There's a lot more friendlier faces in the gyms, a lot different body types. What was it like those early days? You said you came up with Half pretty much. And, Half in our community is known to be an interesting character, all due respect, because I might see that dude one day, so I don't want to say the wrong things. But, I mean, I think with all due respect, I think that he is one of the more interesting heads of the families. And what was that like in the early days especially?
Well, there's the early days of jiu-jitsu, and then there's being with Half in the early days. So, which are kind of two different things. So back then it was jiu-jitsu versus the world.
Yeah.
Like I didn't enter in, like I saw the UFC. That was my gateway into trying to train jiu-jitsu. I saw what Hoist Gracie did, and he was beating up guys twice his size and taking them to the ground, and everybody thought it was a mystery and stuff like that. And to be clear, I don't think I ever had any intentions of going into the UFC at that point, particularly like there was no weight classes at that point.
Right. It was lawless.
Yeah. It's like, it was literally advertised, no rules, no biting, no eye gouging, no fish hooking, no weight classes, no rounds, just go until somebody goes out. It's like,
yeah, it's pretty wild.
Cool. Like, it wasn't necessarily sign me up for that, but it's like, there's skills and there's things that you develop by being in there, and I want to have those skills. Right. Like, no, I don't necessarily want to be in the cage. Okay. So there was, really kind of jiu-jitsu versus the world at this point. Like, jiu-jitsu is like, okay, like if you want to know how to fight, there was still like, well, what if this person was a karate champion or did taekwondo or judo or anything like that? So there was still like a style versus style mentality on that. And even within grappling, it's okay. Like, so you have grappling, like, what's the best grappling style? So when I say jiu-jitsu versus the world, from that stylistic standpoint, we're still going out there kind of proving ourselves. We're trusting ourselves against all styles. And it was really this attitude of what worked. Mm-hmm. And, coming up under Half, there's a lot of blessings on that. But one of the things is, like getting that kind of information directly from the source. 25, 30 years ago, it's like, now there's, you'll find 5 black belts in a class sometimes plus.
Which is crazy.
Like when I started off, there's maybe 5 black belts in Northern California total, like within hundreds of miles of each other. And we were fortunate in California. It's like, go to another state, you might not have another black belt or anybody above a blue belt in a state.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of kind of trial and error and testing and proving yourself and figuring things out. This is also pre-internet age in the sense that you couldn't just go and download the information or see what the fights were happening and stuff like that. So there's a lot of experimentation and figuring things out, with the guidance, of course, that we had from Half at that point. But it really kind of felt like, hey, we're fighting to not only prove ourselves, but prove this art out there. And there's some good and bad with that too. So there was a lot less friendly faces in the gym at that point because we're all it was kill or be killed at that point. The people that did stick it out, that did make it past a month, we formed very strong bonds. To this day, I might not see one of these guys for 10 years. And now when I see him, it's like, I'll look at him like my best friends. It's almost like that kind of wartime mentality, which it really was at that point. Yeah. But regrets on that is in the sense no, but jiu-jitsu is supposed to be good for everybody. There's benefits to everybody. Yeah. So if it's only the strong that survive at that point, which maybe that was what was required at the time, how many people did not do jiu-jitsu because they were too intimidated by it? How many people was I responsible for chasing out of it? Because back in those days when I was a meathead, I was too aggressive about that. Yeah. So nowadays it's kind of finding that balance between the old and the new and what works for me. Guys out of my generation, we always kind of have that conversation. It's like, well, what's the appropriate way of going about this now?
Right. I think I think the natural movement of the world in general kind of takes you to this place where it's good. I think that it's still the library. There's still information and small secrets to be passed on hand to hand that you can't see in a video or you can't get from an instructional. And I think that it's nicer that more people have access to it. I think that, like you said, even when I was going on, early 2000s, there was still gym enforcers, still mat enforcers. There's still, I came up on the East Coast, and I don't know how it was in comparison, but if you traveled, I did a lot of traveling. I do a lot of drop-ins. That's just the way I've always been. When I used to drop in some of the other gyms, I used to have to be almost competition ready. Because when I dropped in over there, they're going to send the best 3 guys at me no matter what.
They're going to test you.
They're going to test you as soon as you walk in the gym, which, it's kind of nice to know where you stand. But also, if you do multiple traveling, it gets a little old and you don't get trusted. You don't get let in on some of the secrets. You don't get to grow as you, navigate the water. So I find it now better as far as a collaboration, a collaborative journey with everybody, I feel like.
I think so. I think it's still a martial art, though. There's still gym enforcers out there. If you come in incorrect, you will get adjusted on that. But it's not necessarily that you're coming in that you're the enemy territory. It's you're still going to get felt out. There's still elements of that. There's a lot less tribalism in jiu-jitsu now, I think, than there was before. Again, but I'm not going to say it went completely away. It's everything's...
Nothing's all hunky-dory anymore.
No. At the end of the day, it's still a combat art. You still can get hurt doing this. There's a certain trust factor on that that you kind of have to establish. And, ideally, the more you go around, the more you learn how to be a better citizen or a tourist or representative of all this. So it's, you walk into a gym, the expectations are a bit different. You're not enemy territory. It's we're not fighting over the same scrap of food and stuff like that. Your higher level will improve my level to a certain extent, but there's kind of a fine line on that. So again, it's that kind of balance thing that, the old farts like myself always kind of like to talk to. It's the idea that I'm coming in and dojo storming, well, thank God those days are in the past.
Yeah.
But the kumbaya and let's all go ahead and be friends. I'd like that to be the reality, but again, it's still a combat art. You still have the potential to get hurt on this. You still have some egos. There's still some not good people. Very small percentage of it right there, but you still have to have your guard up until otherwise.
Yeah, I think I fall into that lull that LeMays are working with same guys over and over. It's kind of like being an old stunt man or old wrestler. I find that everybody goes really hard. I had a lot of hard rounds last night. In general, but I feel like there is a line when you're working with the same people, and I guess that's the you kind of fall into that a little bit when you're working consistently with the same guys, tough or not. Yeah,
iron sharpens iron, as they say, and you kind of build each other up. But at the same time, it's there's the familiarity, which is good and bad. Like there's the trust factor. You know, this person's going to push you hard, but not hurt you. But that familiarity also is like you fall into certain patterns. And sometimes you just need to be tested in different ways, or sometimes you need a different look, or sometimes you need to, just see what it's about, or like, jiu-jitsu is broad enough at this point that there are different philosophies and perceptions and things like that, which are valid. And what makes it valid is like, did this work or not? Okay, did it work in this situation? Can you justify why this worked? Can you intellectualize what you pulled off on this, or what made sense for you going through this? Kind of a lot of layers to it in that sense. Like I said, I think for the most part nowadays there's that happy balance right now that you can travel around like any place you go. You can make a friend at the gym that you're at.
Yeah, as long as you're respectful in the process.
Yeah, there's still that respectful process. There's still like, okay, we're going to push each other. They're still kind of figuring out that level. And the more you get around to that, you find out that we have more of the same than different. Like with that tribalism, like, 3 academies in the whole of the Bay Area. So like we're coming up on US Open number 27 or something like that.
Yeah, I think
so. I've been around since number 2. I remember
that,
which was only 2 gyms, and we hated each other. Like you sit there, and we all laugh about it now, but we mad dogging each other from the gym
the whole time.
And like, and not that tempers got flared. You never really saw like too many fights between the guys and stuff like that. And now some of those guys from rival schools are some really close friends of mine. And it's like, what's this? Who's going to understand me more than somebody that loves something as much as I do?
Right.
Like, even if you're training at someplace else, it's like, how am I not going to have some kind of commonality with you? How can we not be friends if we've devoted so much of our life and intensity and passion to this one thing of jiu-jitsu? Like,
Yeah, I think it also is like, beware the old man and the young man's profession type of thing. It's like, if you're still standing like I'm standing and you've been doing it this long, there's admiration to be paid to that too. Like I think the endurance of will sometimes with just going to jiu-jitsu class, staying on the path, doing the right things, moving in that way to kind of get you to that next level is kind of important. And if you see that level of dedication in somebody else, it's an admirable trait.
No, 100%. I respect anybody that gets onto the mat with the right attitude in that way. The only kind of caution I'll have is like being in this so long, I'll get so many people that will come to me with regrets. It's like, oh man, I wish I stuck with it. Like, like I saw you 30 years ago. I wish I was still into it right now. It's like, well, like, you can't change the past. Like what happened. And quite frankly, it was so rough and back in those days. I'm not saying you're soft and I'm hard or anything like that. There's no guarantee that you would have been doing it for that long. But the point is you're here right now and you have the now right there. Let's go forward with this and enjoy what we have.
Right.
And it's just that kind of lesson right there. So it's respect to anybody that gets out there.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Even rolling with white belts, it kind of, now that I roll with white belts now, it kind of makes me remember what it was like to be a white belt back then. Whereas you need that careful balance of push, but without like destroying their chances of ever thinking they could get better. They're so like infantile in their process that you want to show them that they can do something, but at the same time, there is going to be a large, steep upcline to the progress that you have to make and everything like that.
Yeah, but everybody goes through that same process too, maybe in different ways and all that. You're going to have struggle at some point.
No.
Whether it's like when you first come in, everybody's going to beat you up. Okay, we're not going to do that anymore. But at some point, you're going to have some kind of, if not conflict, some kind of something that you have to overcome, which is important. Like without that, if you never have a struggle in this, what did you learn? Like, how did you get tested? Like, what was going through? If everything was too easy,
right,
that could be as much of a problem as anything else. It's like there's obstacles that are set up. There's a process that everybody goes through. Everybody goes through it or some variation of it, but you will overcome. You will get stronger from this and improve yourself. And eventually, as you get through that progress, not only are you building yourself from within and becoming a stronger person, then you're able to kind of radiate that out. Hopefully, if you were brought up in the right way, if it's nothing else, then, looking at that white belt or the newer students, like kind of showing the way I was there at one point. There's points that I have to remind myself of that at times. It's like, yeah, like I was the person that didn't know left from right, or, teaching a lot will do this too. It's like there's certain things that I take for granted that I can do from 30 years of repetition. It's like, oh yeah, like take some time to figure that out.
Right.
And let's, you know, it's part of the process, right? That's natural and that's growth. And then you can actually get a little bit envious that as me, as the instructor, somebody that's been through that before, it's like, well, like the big discoveries, it's not that you don't have them. It's like they're fewer and far between.
Yeah.
Like when you start off, everything's brand new and special and you're figuring everything out. It's like, wow, like I'm going to see all these jumps you're going to make. And that's awesome. And like, and again, it's like, I can remember very long ago when I was that person, and I'm a little bit envious of that.
Yeah.
That you get that kind of discovery.
The magic that's that magic that keeps you easily going, and you don't have to worry about any kind of motivation. You're just there. As you matriculate through this long path of jiu-jitsu, have you found a lot of different changes as far as like, what do you think the biggest change in jiu-jitsu is right now? As far as like, is it the meathead to intellectual transition? Is it just the expansion of the sport in general? Is it the mentality?
Yeah, I guess you can say like in my time, there's a couple of things I would say. First of all, it's the mentality being a lot different right now. It's like, you know, the whole kind of selling point is like, oh, like how to deal with a street fight. And then you kind of learn it's like, well, like the way you deal with a street fight is not being in that fight in the first place. It's like, you know,
Amen.
It doesn't really matter what techniques you have or this kind of isolated one-on-one situation. It's like world doesn't work that way. It's not fair and it's not right sometimes. And it's just literally a matter of survival. So you kind of have to get that out of your head at some point right there. It's like the idea is like, well, if somebody attacked me on a one-on-one situation with no weapons involved, I'd probably handle myself really well. I don't ever want to be in that situation. I don't trust in the fact that it's always going to be that situation.
Right.
But when you remove that kind of self-defense aspect on it, that kind of opens it up to being able to do a lot of things. Like if you're not worried about getting punched in the face, you know, you're going to see a lot of things like inversions and like people butt scooting and stuff like that, which is, you know, like, again, the old guys kind of decry. And to be clear, I don't want to be one of those guys. Like when I was coming up, there was a guy that's been here like relatively like years past. And it's like, oh, back in my day, it's like, you don't want to be that guy. It's like, no, get off my lawn. It's like, like Snoopy Kid and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, I didn't want to hear that then. And I don't want to be that guy now.
Right.
Like, but I will point out like some of the differences. And even if it's not the attitude that you're going to get punched in the face on stuff, like, if you do your research, if you know the history on this, like it's colored how some of the technique will go and like the choices they'll make, even though like nobody like is well, not, from a sports standpoint is thinking about getting hit in the face. You know, for a concrete example, like the style of passing now, because, you know, being on the bottom, being able to invert, going after these leg attacks, right? You know, there's a few reasons why you wouldn't have done that back in the day. First of all, like, if you just kind of flop down, somebody coming down and wailing on you would be an issue. And there's a secondary where leg attacks might be a little bit less. And I've heard this argument that, you know, surgery's gotten a lot better. Like if you're working out like in Brazil, like in say the 60s, and like they're saying, oh, the footlocks aren't that great or anything like that. It's like, well, like if you're a manual laborer, if you work on your feet and you blow out your leg, what's the consequence of that? And then the repairs aren't that good. And like you're basically begging at that point.
Right.
Versus like nowadays, like, I'll just go ahead and get a, you know, stem cells or cadavers ACL or something like that.
The willingness.
But, you know, so now the leg attacks are more prevalent and stuff like that. And it's grown like the technical aspect of the sport. So the passing has changed in that sense. That, okay, now I'm more likely to go down because I'm not liable to get hit in the face by that person and kind of crouching down, getting lower to the ground also gives them less access to my legs versus going back to that whole like kind of Vale Tudo thing. Like I came up and I still love passing from my feet and standing up, and we have a position we call the A-frame, but it was largely based off of the fact that you have somebody that you managed to get to their back that's trying to up kick you in the face.
Right.
Like, so you're basically staying with that stand. Yeah, exactly. So you have that range on that. So both of those things can still have a play in today's game of sport jiu-jitsu if you recognize what the context is, if you recognize where the person's playing. So I do think that historical lesson in knowing why we do things is still really valuable in jiu-jitsu. And that information's all out there. It's your willingness to go ahead and you know, for the newer folks out there to kind of learn from the past and see where folks are coming from and where the possibilities and alternatives and how this thing is cyclical. And it's also up to the old school guys or the old people. I'm going to put myself in that category to realize like, okay, the game has shifted now. Like, you know, like let's be realistic what's going on. Like if you're not up to date on what's going on, if you're not seeing what they're doing these days, you're going to get left behind. Right. But to me, that's a beautiful thing in the sense that you have that kind of generational thing that both sides, both groups have something to contribute to the other. Like just from a pure technical standpoint, jiu-jitsu's, I remember having this conversation with Eddie Bravo at one point. There's like, there's so much out there, you can't master it in one lifetime.
Yeah.
Like, and you're not going to get good at everything. So you kind of have to pick and choose what your game is going to be. And then but you also have to be aware of all these other games that are going to be thrown at you, that people aren't going to play by your rules all the time, and how you adapt to that.
Yeah. I think that's the crazy part, is that just this like infinite spider work of possibilities that everybody has out there these days. And, you know, like the Ryan Gordons and the Mike Musumessis of the world, where they train all the time and they have a chance to go and really like delve into their training to the point where they can break down all these small nuances and really like extrapolate all this knowledge from just consistent rolling in different spots where they can take advantage of. It just seems like it's the old lessons, but like layered with more traps, more avenues, more things of that nature.
So they're there and they're technical in that sense, and there's a lot to go through. But if you want to get better at this, a lot of times, and I would argue the better way to get better at anything is really to simplify things. Mm-hmm. So like look at the commonalities are, what their philosophy was, or what they're trying to do. And if you follow somebody on those philosophies, if you look at their basics, if you kind of try to get the essence of what they're trying to do, then you'll have a better chance of dealing with that person. But if you chase every single technique down the thing, oh, they could do this, they could do this, they can do this, they're always going to be ahead of you at that point. Mm. Like there's no way of catching up at that place or playing that arms race with somebody. You know, like both of those examples, like take Gordon Ryan, for example, who has a claim to being the no-gi GOAT right now. And like, I'm not going to dispute that, but he's also very well suited right now to the rules that he's playing against right now. With the Abu Dhabi, the longer time limits, his style is, he's not super athletic compared to some of these guys. He's strong as all hell.
Right.
So he needs to grind you down. He comes on top. He puts this pressure on you. He breaks you from a will standpoint. And you give him like these 15, 20, 30-minute time limits, no time limit matches. This all works out the better for him. Put him in a CGI against like a Nicky Rod and those rule sets, which is 5-minute rounds, where you don't have this ability like that. Could he be as successful on that? You know, it was the same thing with the early UFCs with the no time limits and having Hoist Gracie, and they're like, Hoist Gracie is not athletic at all, right? Yeah. You know, if you're depending on him to be fast on these things and be able to catch somebody right away that knows what he's doing at this point, he doesn't have that ability.
Right.
Like his whole ability is to grind you down, keep him safe, and then he's eventually going to catch you if he does that way. But he's not prone to those fast finishes. And like the person that can get that fast finish these days, there's a certain high level of technique that has to be done above your competitor, and a huge amount of athleticism on that.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense too. I think that he's been I think a lot of these guys are figuring out that Mayweather factor, you know, where they can find a way to keep like a definitive edge via the rule set. You know, Mayweather notoriously lasts not half of his career, but last 8 to 10 fights, everybody was coming up to him in weight class. You know, there were small fighters come out of him keeping a overall advantage of this situation. You know, hats off to Gordon Ryan for doing something similar, but also keeping that up at the same time. You gotta win. You gotta win when you're there. You know?
To be fair, he's come up under a bunch of different rule sets. So he did EBI and he's done IBJJF. So I don't want to say that he's gaming the system or something like that. And there's definitely people that will game the system. They'll look at the not the advantage in the sense that you get the advantage in the point, but it's like, okay, what is the rule set and how am I going to play against this rule set? Whereas Gordon Ryan, the rule sets and the longer time limits definitely tend to favor him, but I don't get the sense that like his his satisfying win is the domination of somebody eventually getting after submission. It's kind of that old school feeling on that. He happens to be more well suited to certain rule sets, and he's probably earned his right to stay within those rule sets at these points.
At this point, for sure.
Yeah. It's like if you're going to beat him, like, if he's going to put his legacy on the line, it's going to be under his rule set, and you're going to have to beat him in that game. Him going into, say, again, a CGI with the shorter rounds and stuff like that is not going to be to his favor. There's even a comment that he made before he had the split with the DDS team that he told, I think there was an article, he told Craig Jones not to do UFC thing against Mason Fowler.
I think
because Mason Fowler is a very good grappler. But again, like the strategy on those EBI rules is like get to overtime and then like you can get the fastest escapes and the fastest finishes and stuff like that. This wasn't going to be to your favor. He understands that rule set really well.
Intricately.
And like he understands that really well. And let's give a little bit of credit to his coach, who's one of the sharpest minds
in the game.
Yeah.
And I think when you have, willing soldiers like that, they're just willing to put everything on the line, and then you're able to receive that kind of information. It's almost like you're downloading to a computer at that point.
Well, it's the work that you're putting into it and that too. It's like at what point and Gordon will never say this, has he surpassed what Danaher has given him, or like what he's built upon him and stuff like that? And the funny thing is, it's like he's very quick to give 100% of the credit in the world to Danaher. And Danaher doesn't really speak on this type of stuff, but I can say as a coach that, your goal as a coach is to build somebody that will eventually surpass you. Right. Like, if you're not doing that, what are you doing? Like, my job as a coach to build people better than I ever was. Any good coach would tell you the same thing on that. And I think that Danaher is obviously a good coach. So it's kind of that relationship, and it's not a false humility type thing too. It's
no, he's really everything he represents.
Yeah. Yeah. So
yeah, I remember I had a buddy that was training at Henzo's, and he would train in the big room in the basement with all the guys. And I went and saw him. I watched a couple training sessions. Obviously, I wasn't able to get on the mats because it was well above my pay grade, especially at that point. Even now, I don't think I could get on the mats that was going on. But I met Dan down there, and I met Henzo, and just as advertised, good guys, but just he's very stoic. Down here is walking around very calculated. Everything he's doing is very measured. So I mean, like, everything these people do play out, and they are as advertised as you see them. They carry their business the same way all the time, on and off the mats too. I think he was leaving and he was wearing a rash guard on the way out.
I tried to give him a T-shirt once. It's like, and he told me way back then, it's like, I can't take that. I only wear you got a rash guard. I'd wear the rash guard. It's like, I didn't have one at the time.
He only wears rash guards.
Yeah, Matt Serra told me he wore a rash guard to his wedding. Like, it was a tuxedo one, but he wore a rash guard to a wedding. Like,
it's not. He says it's the most efficient way of. It just feels good. It's efficient.
Nobody also didn't argue that Danaher was an odd duck at times, but
he's super. I don't think you can do both though. I don't think you can be this like mentally like engaged and thoughtful and not be a little bit off.
The funny thing is the rumor, like, what they would tell me, like, because I'd go to Henzo's quite a bit, actually. It's like John Danaher's ability to talk to any female and bring them back to his place. Like, they're just like, yeah, that guy's been with more supermodels than anything. Like, they don't talk about that all that often, but it was just like, yeah, like when it comes to like players or like, or people, ladies' men. Yeah, with the rash guard and the time he had the comb over, and it was just like, yeah, could walk into any room, walk out with any other girl. Like in the room, like supermodels, no problem.
Isn't that the most? Yeah, I feel like he like talks to everybody like a dog trainer. Like, he's like Cesar Millan. He sees his target, he eyes it up, and then it just starts hypnotizing you or something. Like,
the ability. I mean, you've been in the nightlife scene. Your ability to talk is like your most dangerous weapon, both in terms of like talking to the opposite sex or the same sex. Like you can talk your way out of something.
Diffusing, helping out. Yeah, it's a multi. Yeah. I like to. It's funny. I actually got into it at work. This was 2 months ago. I was breaking up a fight, and I grabbed this guy, and when I leveraged him over, I didn't realize he didn't have his balance. He was drinking, and we almost went to the bricks. And one of the purple belts from Campbell was there. He was like, "Hey man, I almost had to catch you," but it's like all these different like personalities in your regular life. You know, as I go through, I see the guy I spend 2 days a week with, for 4 hours, and he's in the crowd at work, or somebody I trained with a year ago pops up in front of me and it's like, "Oh, I didn't know you worked here." All this stuff. Have you had a lot of like real life interactions with the community? I feel like it's like the secret society almost, like
Fight Club, right?
it's
like, don't
so
talk about
much
it.
like Fight Club, right?
Yeah. And it's much more mainstream right now too. It's like, okay, like, I got my cauliflower ear like 25 years ago. That people assumed it was a birth defect at that point. No, like they didn't know what it was. It wasn't like they didn't know what the UFC was and stuff like that. So like, if you knew, you knew. And nowadays everybody knows what it is. Like, don't mess with that guy, just based off the ears. And of course, now that so many more people are training, it's not that big of a deal at this point. But yeah, there was that kind of quote unquote secret society on that. And it was a smaller community at that point too. There wasn't the delineations between like MMA and jiu-jitsu. Like, they were much more blurred than they are right now.
Right.
So yeah, going out and meeting folks and interacting. And, we had our thing going, and it wasn't just Fight Club because it was secret. Like, it was kind of like something primal about your ability to fight back in those days. Like, and somebody that knows how to handle their business and carries themselves in a certain way will open up some avenues for you one way or the other on this.
Yeah. Almost like the will it takes to be good at this translates to, being a decent person. I know that a lot of circles that I've moved in, on the East Coast and different places in the community, it's just ultimately like nailed in my respect factor. I've always been a respectful person, but it's just like when you go to a class and once upon a time, everybody goes through it. You're a big guy, you're a small guy, and then you run across a small guy and then you get destroyed. And then you realize that like anything is possible. I think the level of humility that you have for just being respectful, not knowing what anyone's capable of, just really coming in the room in the way of, I'm coming here, no offense, no harm, no nothing. And I think that a lot of that is from my years with jiu-jitsu and just cementing in the fact that you never know what anybody's capable of, and everyone's to be respected because everyone can be, you can add value through that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, again, it's not a false humility on this. It's like, I've gotten this out of my system. I know what people are capable of. If I really want to do that type of stuff, there's a time and place for it. Like, like beefing in a bar or something like that. It's like, I'm here to have a good time. Like, doing security work back in the day, scan the room right there. The person that doesn't look like they're having a good time is the one that's always going to be an issue. Like, who's going to mess up a good time? Like, who's going to go around, like, you're talking to a bunch of girls and people are buying you drinks. What is your motivation to go ahead and cause trouble at that point? Like, why would you do that? It's like, why am I going to mess up a good time on that? So.
You see it all the time though, man.
Yeah, well, it's unhappy people that walking in there. It's like, that person that started getting frustrated. It's like, that fight or fuck syndrome right there. Like, it's like you got to get your testosterone out one way or the other. It's like, well,
I wish more people were fucking though.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it makes your life a lot easier, right? I don't want that person just kind of like sitting there and kind of mad dogging everybody or like, why? It's like, there's better avenues for this.
Dude. Yeah.
But like I said, like there's a way that when you, it's not only knowing how to carry yourself is one thing, because you can be a bully by knowing how to carry yourself. But it's also like, okay, like I don't need to do this. There's a better way on this. I kind of respect everybody. There's a second component on that. It's like, it's not just your ability to fight, like, that makes you a better person or easier to deal with. It's like that kind of knowing when to use it and when not to use it, that kind of discretion that it gives you on that. Yeah. And by that token, somebody that carries themselves in that way, there's that kind of that unspoken, you can look at that person, it's like, okay, like that person knows what he's doing right there. And it's not so much that he's not to be messed with, but if you're good to him or like there's not a situation, there's not going to be an issue with that person. Yeah. Like, versus that one that's like got something to prove and that's kind of looking around like that. That's definitely somebody you have to keep an eye on. Yeah. So like there's that kind of dual component on that. And then even that ability to kind of carry yourself in that way with respect for yourself and respect for others, it's somewhat contagious. So like, people will pick up on that right away. So even if you aren't in that kind of fight club world, when you walk in there, when somebody sees somebody like that, it attracts like-minded or people going through stuff, and has a tendency to repel things that it wants to avoid, that comes out of insecurity and stuff like that.
I've been to a couple of major tournaments. I've been really lucky. I remember I went to Worlds in 2017, and then I went to Worlds Masters in 2000. I didn't compete in 2000. I competed in 17. But I remember I brought someone with me in 2020, and we were just walking around. I was like, "What do you see?" She was like, "Everybody looks like you, or they're tall and skinny, but like they look really mean." And then they start talking, and everybody's having a good time. I was like, "This is probably the safest room you're ever going to be in your life. Nobody wants to start in trouble. There's nothing to prove." And it's just nice walking in those rooms where you just realize, like, yeah, there's an infinite amount of killers, but like because of that factor, nobody wants to do anything.
Yeah, like the time and place for it, and we've been through that, and who's going to walk in and be that there's always going to be a bigger alpha dog in the room too, but it's not even that at that point. It's like I'm here to have a good time. Like I might have a weird definition of a good time that there will be strangling each other at one point, but like there's also an understanding of how that goes.
Yeah,
it's our mutual idea of a good time, and we're gonna be fine afterwards, and we both got something out of it, and we can move on from there. Like there's that kind of thing that really only kind of comes with time and a bit of travel, and it's like developing kind of the people skills that go along with that, in addition to, again, there's the self-respect, and then there's the respect for others. And the two of those things have to go hand in hand.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, man. Throughout your years, you've worked, especially I'd imagine in the early days too. I mean, I think nowadays people have the luxury to start as a white belt in one school and matriculate all the way to black belt if they choose to. There's enough instructors, there's enough people staying around the community, and a lot of people can have that experience if they choose to. I know in the earlier days there were less instructors, less people. Did you find yourself in the early days like moving around or going to different schools, or did you kind of stay under half? I saw a couple different lineages, and then is that lineage of change important where you go next, or is it kind of staying on the reputation of one lineage? Like if you have multiple lineages, say you start with half, and you're like, oh, you have to change because you move, and then you move back. Were you always half Gracie, or is it one of those kind of deals?
I was always half Gracie, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, it's like, again, that era, it's like we're in a whole bunch of schools you could go to at that point. Like, right. Like there was 2 or 3 in the area. The tribalism probably contributed to some of that part too, which I have a bit of regret on and stuff like that. But from a convenience factor, like, yeah, you weren't going. You're like, where else were you going to go? Yeah. Like you didn't have those travel aspects and stuff like that. So like I consider Half my instructor, and he's the one that awarded me all belts. But I was also in a unique situation because I had on the mat, because I was one of the early jiu-jitsu journalists and things, that even in those eras of tribalism, I got to go visit different gyms and check things out, even though being a hardcore Half guy and being part of that team. But then there was that other side of me that got to visit and travel and try to promote everybody. And that was the important thing. It's like, I'm not just promoting our guys on this. I'm trying to promote the sport. I'm trying to promote everybody that's in this art along with it. So that got me access to different areas and different places that I don't think a lot of people would have had at that point. And with a full understanding, it's like, yeah, I'm a Half guy right here, but there's also a level of trust, both in terms of what they'd allow me to be part of and see and show me. Like I was in a very unique situation at a unique time on that sense. And what I took away from that was, okay, so like it made me, as a student in the game, I could see the differences. Like, oh, why is this person doing this, and what's the reasoning for this? And there are differences on the games. Like, there's enough, and sometimes it's little nuanced things. Sometimes there's big things on the philosophy that go through. The fight versus sport kind of aspect on that might be one example of that. But then the other thing too is like, what are the commonalities on this? It's like if I've traveled with 5 instructors, 4 of them showed this the exact same way and use the same terminology. It's like, better be sure that that's pretty important things to kind of pick up and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really helpful in that sense. That again, like, to me, like this journey as you start going into this, and the more you get into this, or maybe like on the side of it that I am, that like with all these differences and all these options and this, right, to me, it's about simplifying things. It's like finding the commonalities, making the adjustments, being more efficient, and kind of going through there with a lot of black belts that have been around for a long time that will say like, oh, I don't get that excited about no techniques, but if you show me something that makes me 5% more efficient in something I do all the time, that's pretty exciting to me, which is true. But then like, you can also have the flip side of it. It's like, you can hear like, I don't want to learn any new techniques and it turns into that get off my lawn tent mentality.
Or like more afraid to learn just something in general, go back to learning, flip the switch.
And that learning aspect too, it's like, it can come from a whole bunch of different sources. Once you know how to actually learn, once you kind of speak the process, once you understand a couple of things. So in that sense, like, I mean, I've learned stuff from students quite frequently actually, and folks that have less experience or even lower ranks. It's, they'll say something or show me something. It's like, occasionally, like, I've been around for a long time, so it's hard to catch me off guard or show me something that I haven't seen.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know everything. Like, you can show me something and I can come up with a conclusion on that. Or there's been cases that, you show me something and it's like, okay, now this is my arsenal right now. Thanks for that.
Are there more variations you find, or is it like you find like brand new material, or is it variations on old things that you've seen?
I think jiu-jitsu is cyclical. Like, I really think that, like brand new stuff, it's, even back in my day, we thought there was brand new stuff. And then like there was guys doing it beforehand. There was guys, you look at, you can go back to like videos like the Kodokan in the 50s, for example, and you'll see them doing this lapel stuff and like some inversions and spinning and stuff like that. It's like, oh, we thought we invented that at that point. Like, there's only a certain amount of ways to move the human body. There's only like, a gi is a gi, a leg is a leg.
Yeah.
Whether it's on or off right now. So like, I don't think there's that much. I mean, I suppose there's a possibility that somebody can invent somebody new, but like if you did your research, maybe it was a simultaneous discovery. I bet you somebody did that at some other place at some point, especially now that there's so many more people doing that type of stuff. But what I do believe, it's cyclical because there's so much jiu-jitsu to learn. There's so many kind of aspects of the game. And there's only so much you're going to accomplish in a short time and show off in the competition, that it'll be cyclical in that sense. For example, let's go back like, mid 2000s, stuff like that, when the leg game started becoming a little bit more prevalent. Okay? Mm-hmm. Like, because of the IBJJF rules and the banning of certain techniques, largely it got forgotten. Like it was like jiu-jitsu versus jiu-jitsu. And then you start seeing guys like when you got into ADCCs, like, oh, we're not constrained by these IBJJF rules. Like, we can go ahead and reap and throw heel hooks in and do all these other attacks. And what it forced people to do is like, okay, first of all, like, you had a high level of success when you did those things, which people didn't do. Like, one of the arguments for like your level of success or my level of percentage chance of being successful at a particular technique is how many times I've done this versus how many times you defended doing this. If I've done this more times than you defended it, chances are I'm going to be able to pull this
successful.
Off. Yeah. But, so then the game started catching up. It was like, well, everybody had to know the leg attacks. And now it's no longer this huge advantage to have those leg attacks. It's just something that everybody has to know. Right. And one of the things that changes the game, that everybody knows these leg attacks, it's like, okay, like the old standing up and trying to avoid getting kicked in the face type passing makes you more susceptible to those inversions and leg attacks.
Because you're so open.
Yeah. So now you got to come down, you got to pass in a different way. And you got to hide your legs, and all this type of stuff, so that leg attack, all that stuff isn't as prevalent anymore. So consequently, not only is the top game involved, now you see a lot more things like, pressure passing or body lock passing and things like that as a response to what happened to the legs. There's a famous quote by Wayne Gretzky. It's like, if you want to be successful or something like that, you don't skate to where the puck is, you skate to where the puck's going. Mm-hmm. So I think it's like, okay, what's the next evolution of the game? Where are we going after from there from a technical standpoint? Like, how do you deal with these guys like scrambling around trying to passing? I think, and it might be wishful thinking on my part, being like an old school guy, that like the close guard is going to have to become more prevalent because you're going to take away the movement from those folks.
Yeah.
So you'll see the pendulum swing back that way eventually.
Go back to basics.
Yeah.
Well, back to that system.
Yeah. Like I said, and to me, basics aren't necessarily the series of techniques you do. Basics are more like the philosophy and the fundamentals of, and the mindset of why you do this move at this particular time, and having that understanding. And even at the higher levels, if you understand how somebody goes ahead and thinks that way and what their mindset is, because you get thrown off by somebody coming in like every competition season. They'll add more techniques into the arsenal. They'll take certain things away. Their philosophies very rarely change.
That's true.
I'll give another example of an old school guy, like, a rival is like my old training partner had a series of battles against Marcelo Garcia. Was actually, I'll drop his name, Cameron Earl, and there's long stories about that guy. But he was actually 2-1 against Marcelo Garcia. And the strategy we implemented, and I've actually talked to Marcelo Garcia about this later on, is, people look at them, they say like X guards and arm drags and things like that. The truth of the matter is, the philosophy you got to look at that is Marcelo Garcia is a counter fighter. Yeah. Like he'll bait you a little bit and then you come in a little bit forward, and then if you give him an inch, he takes a mile. So the approach has to be one of two things. Like you have to go in very cautiously because you can't overextend yourself in him, or you get him a little bit impatient and then you get him to shoot forward and you are overconfident, and that's when you can take advantage of it. Say like when Robert Drysdale finished him off at Abu Dhabi 2007 in the finals of the Absolute. Marcel got a little overconfident, shot in, and then Drysdale caught him.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Drysdale being a bigger player too. That plays a big.
That makes a huge difference on that too. Marcel's not a small guy either.
Yeah.
Nicest guy in the world. Like I have to say, like, he just opened up that academy in Hawaii, and like he got through the cancer diagnosis and stuff like that.
Which is awesome. Shout out.
Yeah, Marcel is amazing. Like one of the best humans that we have in jiu-jitsu by far.
I think it's an interesting. I've been blessed with the opportunity to meet so many different people. I've trained with all walks of life. I train with people with different handicaps, different disparities, different people that were rich, different people that were poor. Are there any people that stand out through the years that you got to train with, or you got to actually get to know through the world of jiu-jitsu?
Man, like I've sometimes compared myself to like Forrest Gump, that I've met so many people, like, and I've been in so many kind of famous situations, or like behind the scenes, or see me in the background of like, and I got a meme. I got to poop or whatever.
What's RZA doing these days, man? What's he up to?
When was the last time I talked to him? Like it's Adisa that knows them better. Like we were trying to bring one of those guys out for like music in the park, actually.
Oh, that'd be dope, bro.
Yeah, like, but it was so short notice. Like they had another act lined up that fell through. That would have been kind of same type of genre. So I got a call. It's like, hey, those guys? It's like, well, I know a guy that knows those guys.
Right.
But it was so short notice they couldn't pull it off. But yeah, maybe next year's season actually we can get that group going on.
That'd be rad. Like that. When you their connection to martial art is a real thing. I think a lot of people think that a lot of Wu-Tang stuff, early Wu-Tang was like almost gimmicky, and then they realized they were fans. But like a lot of people don't realize that throughout the years, a lot of those different members have done some training, and done different things.
I think the RZA is more wushu and stuff like that, and the kung fu aspect of that. Like I think he said, or like the Jizza has also said that I think their kids actually train in jiu-jitsu now. Like they're both based out of LA at this point, right?
I guess so.
At this point,
I think that's the move, man. You get tired of being cold, bro. Like it's just the weather's just so shit, and then it's such a like everybody always bags on it. It's such a pussy thing to say, but like I think that's just the great migration. After a while, you get old enough and you don't care if you look like a pussy, and then you move to warm weather. Like
yeah, well, like nowadays, like I totally get why old people move to Florida and Arizona.
100%.
Like a couple of years ago, like one of my good buddies was starting to compete again, Dan Camarillo, and then like it was a tournament around this time of year. It's like, well, you compete at all these other tournaments. Why aren't you competing in this one? It's like, it's too cold. I'm old. I can't warm up properly. And I started laughing at him. He's only a year older than I am, right?
Yeah.
And then I swear, like a year or two later, like I totally got it. Like I'm getting out of bed and like I'm shivering. It's like I don't feel like moving right now. It takes me so much longer to warm up at this point. It's like I think I need to move to a warmer. I mean, like we're in California, so like how can you complain about the weather at this point?
I mean, they don't tell you that all of California is not Southern California.
Yeah.
I know that for a fact. I was like, wait a minute, why do I have a coat on? Like, because it's December in the Bay, or it's a random time in the Bay where that 2:00 in the morning where that wind comes down. Dave looks good though. I saw him on the mats the other day. It's amazing how like stylistically the cats that are those high energy cats are still high energy cats that like can just move.
Dave is an anomaly. He's always like, in his time and his prime was one of the fastest guys, and his ability to like, like I learned a lot from what he taught me, and I learned a lot from rolling with him and trying to figure out how to deal with that guy, in the sense that if I was trying to match that guy mood for mood or speed for speed, like in his prime, nobody was going to do that. Like it was a very fruitless venture to try to go ahead and do that, play that game with him.
It's really kind of like the whole, like, you don't really know what you're going to get until you start rolling with someone. I think that's kind of why I like open rolling so much. It's because you can look at somebody and be like, oh, they represent this, they look like this, and then next thing you know, they're just on you, boss. Huh? and you're just trying to survive, and then you're trying to come up with contingency plans, and you're trying to play the game of human chess.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting thing.
Although I'll say it's like, those styles are out there. You expect everybody to get out there. Eventually it's like, okay, like I have my game, and it's like, I can play your game or I can play my game. Like, and I'm going to be more successful if I play my game as opposed to your game. And sometimes it's fun. Like I want to play your game. I'm going to see how that goes. But it's also like adapting your game, or it's not just adapting your game to play against other people. It's forcing other people to adapt to your game.
No.
And going through, like, there's a lot of psychology at a certain point. It's like, there's only so much more technique that you're going to pick up. Like I would argue from a jiu-jitsu standpoint, about purple belts, 90% of your game is kind of set up, your philosophies. It's not that you won't learn more techniques, but the techniques get less important at that point, as opposed to the timing, the pacing, the understanding things, the application, the psychology of why you did a certain move in a certain way, that you can only really have once you've had that gotten to a certain point, that you got a kind of certain level of basics and confidence and fulfillment in your game. And then you kind of look externally, and it's like, okay, like how do I apply myself to this? And like, what am I learning off of this person? And like I said, a lot of times it's not just from a technical standpoint. You're picking up other things off of this. Like, why is he moving this way? With Dave, for example, like, and again, this is a conversation I had with him, because we came up under the same school. Like, and we're both Half Gracie black belts, and he was ahead of me, and like, he's definitely my senior on this. But in a large way, we came up under the same philosophies and stuff like that. So he would define a good position as a place where he has more options than his opponent. I would define a good position or a good situation as a situation where my opponent has less options than I do. We're saying the same thing, but not really, if you think about it.
Yeah. It's more of a making their experience an experience of scarcity, whereas he's moving from a place of abundance where he can seize it. And it's a slight. It's interesting you said it, because I think that's where I've been having trouble with my jiu-jitsu, as far as like, I think I'm in a place where I'm trying to counter and trying to play so many games instead of just playing my own game and just moving forward with that, and then adjusting off the adjustments they make to my game. So it's
and it's forcing those adjustments too. So like, having rolled with you a number of times and being somewhat familiar with your game, it's like, if you're playing your game and it's like, you're on top, you're pressuring, you're going to add some explosivity with your motion and stuff like that in a controlled fashion and stuff like that. When you're deliberate, you're very hard to deal with. Like, when you have that kind of confidence, you're going to move ahead and you have this idea, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. That's difficult to deal with. The second you start second guessing yourself, that's where your issues are going to come up. And there's two aspects on that too. It's like, number one, it's okay, let's have that confidence in that game to like go ahead and just know that, yeah, I'm really dangerous at these parts right now, or like, I'm really dangerous when I go ahead and impose my game on folks. Like when I play the pace and what I want to go ahead and do on this. So that's one aspect of that. And I suppose that's true of everybody else. I guess the other thing too is like, okay, when you have that give and take, the give and take is actually, it's really just take. Like, like you don't really give anybody on that. No, it's
no,
true.
You're right though.
Like,
you don't give a chance.
And like, if there's options, it's because you forced them into those options, like, so you can control it. So there's not an infinite amount of things that somebody's going to go ahead and do. It's one or two things, and you're already kind of prepared for that.
Yeah.
I would actually say, in one of the ways that, that I can deal with when your game's coming through, is my experience level from the psychology factor on. There's like, okay, like he might be expecting these things, or I sense that kind of hesitation at this point. Like, what information am I going to give you right now to get the response that I want to, knowing that, there might be a couple of other factors in too. It's like, okay, you're going against me with that, that have more experience. So if I do something that you're like thinking that you have to react to it, and I get that reaction, like in my head, I'm like, thank God, like, I can go ahead and make that motion. You gave me that opening that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Like, if you just insisted, like, if you put me in a side control, for example, throw your weight on me, have this kind of smash on me, that's going to be a bad day for me at that point. Like, it gets to be a point that only by getting you to second guess yourself is where I get my opening. Versus like, and like if you did what you had, you kind of move forward, you'd have more success more often than not in that particular situation. Right. Yeah. So I would say that about your game. I want to say, like, sometimes with the big guys, and I'm going to qualify as you as a strong guy on the mat, not saying that you're a meathead game like that, but it's like that kind of confidence. Like sometimes I'll see it's like you're going to do this and you're just going to have to, like, as your mentality on this, I'm going to do this and you're going to have to deal with me. And that's the way it goes. Yeah. And having that confidence to go through that. I've had this conversation with a few other guys in the gym that I'm more familiar with the games are, what their games are. And like with the amount of students we have, I can't be familiar with every single person, obviously, but I am familiar with your game. And I can kind of qualify a few other folks. It tends to be the guys that, like, if you didn't want to be moved, like, how am I going to move you? Like, you have all those advantages on that spot right there. And having that confidence, if you don't want to do something, like, it's not going to be done. Like, having that attitude about that. And if I'm going to do something, if my opponent's going to do something, it's only because I allowed it. And I'm just basically kind of working you into a trap on that sense. And like I said, that's the point, whereas it's not that there's not technical aspects of this and you can't sit there and kind of chart and figure that out, but it's much more of a mental psychology thing. That's that kind of transformation on a game. Like, I firmly believe you actually have all the tools in your arsenal to be able to do that. Now it's just
put everything in the right places.
Go ahead and do that.
Yeah, Sean was on my ass about that the other day. But is there something, and thank you, by the way, please, I don't want to get hyper. I'm like, and then what did I do? Yes. But thank you. I appreciate that. It's something I am working on. And something that, I'm never giving up. I'm gonna get a black belt in jiu-jitsu. It's just a matter of time, and I'm just gonna take that time to get better and really just invest in myself. So I plan on it. I appreciate that. If there is one thing or one mantra that you can go back and talk to your white belt self, like if you can get into the time machine, black belt, Gumby, reputation, all the techniques, all the knowledge, all the different scenarios you've been through, what do you think your biggest lesson to your white belt self would be, besides never stop?
I think I touched on it a little bit, but it's like kind of eventually it's the simplification of things. Like, don't overthink things. Like, don't second guess yourself. Like, have confidence. Find the commonalities. Enjoy yourself. Kind of move through there. Enjoy that process. When you're in that process, when you're kind of coming up, and like, I'm trying to think of the time machine, but the advice that I constantly give to folks and stuff like that, there's a process, and you can, like, now having been through this and guided people through that, it's like I see that process and I see the steps and stuff like that. But and where your growth and where your successes are and where you need work on and stuff like that. And those aspects will change. Like, they'll change over your time. Not everybody has the same things they need to work on at a given point, but there is a process. Enjoy that process. Take your time with it. And again, it basically, like, is simplifying things. Like, it's really easy, and I'd say in jiu-jitsu, but you can make this metaphor of life. I got to chase this, and I got to do this, and I got to do this, and I got to do this. It's like, no, you're doing this to be centered. You're doing this for, like, that kind of personal growth to start off with, and go with that. And, like, once you kind of establish that and you grow, like, exponentially, everything winds up growing from that. And it might take a day. It's not going to take a day, but it might take a month, or it might take a year. It might take 10 years and stuff like that. There's always that kind of progress. And that progress, if you've done this, or if you have the attitude, doesn't ever hopefully stop. It might really slow down again after a certain point. Like I said, at this right now, I don't get those same joys of discovery as frequently as I did when everything was brand new. But the instant that you're not growing, that you don't have that ability to do that, what's the point? Like, enjoy it while you can.
It is, man. Well, we're wrapping this thing up. I appreciate your time. I wanted to go on record. I know when I came out here, it was a tough time for me. helped me out a lot in the beginning stages. Just having a place to a safe space. I've always found the Mats to be a safe space, and I was really happy to walk into the gym after checking out a bunch of other places, and it wasn't the right vibe for me, and Heroes was. And I appreciate that. I appreciate all the instructors that are around. I appreciate that family. So it's done a lot for me. And, as the head of that, I would always wanted to thank you for that, bud.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you. And I think you get that in the sense, like I said, I use that word exponential a lot, that, you get more people in there and it kind of builds up, and people come in and you give and you take and you contribute and you get into it and you get out of it and stuff like that. And the more people that are in there, the better it is for everybody. Like, again, like, not to go too much in the, just within the jiu-jitsu, it's happened in the gym, it's happened in jiu-jitsu in this world. And it's a beautiful thing, man. And I'm so happy that you're part of that.
Nah, I appreciate that. Well, Gumby, thank you very much. We're signing off to all the people that might be watching this joint, all my jiu-jitsu heads. Os, thank you so much for coming by. Gumby, thank you.
Thank you.
Catch you next one, man.
All right,
Be
appreciate
good, guys.